Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to give this a shot. This is the on-device automated captioning on Mac, but I'm not great at enunciating. Probably won't be accurate. Hopefully it'll be helpful. And what else? What am I forgetting? We're recording. All right. Yeah, I'll start off. So. Good morning. I'm really happy to be here at Design for Drupal for the first time in person since 2019, which is pretty exciting. So I want to thank Leslie and the organizing team for making that happen. I know organizing a conference is a lot of work. So my name is Dan Zollman. I'm here to talk about information architecture. I've worked with a lot of people across disciplines who have voiced that they feel IA is important to their work. But they're not necessarily confident in talking about it. So my goal is to introduce you to a number of ideas that I think will help you work through information architecture problems. I did change the title slightly from techniques to principles because I think that's going to be more meaningful for today. I'm also going to close that door because of the background noise. Okay, so I'm going to start us off with a little case study, and this is a very exciting topic that's really energized us to learn about design in Drupal for the next 2 days. Just being sarcastic. So if you live in Massachusetts and you don't have health insurance through an employer, there are a number of ways you can get it through the state government. If you or a dependent meet certain criteria, you might be eligible for free or discounted health insurance. But even if you're not eligible, you can get it through the state marketplace. But like most government services, trying to get through their process can be pretty confusing and frustrating. If you've never done that before, you might not even know if insurance is available, what kind of insurance is available, or what to call it. As a thought experiment, let's imagine how somebody might look for that information online. If you're like me, you might start with a Google search for MA health insurance. So these are the results. And if you're savvy enough to ignore all the ads and scams and private insurance, which might not be true for everyone, but ideally you'd scroll down and you'd find 3 options. The first one says Mass Health. Okay, Massachusetts health insurance. That must be what I'm looking for, right? But I also noticed there are 2 links here labeled, they're both labeled Health Connector. I've mapped out how I think the process would go from here, based on my first time doing it a few years ago. For the sake of brevity, I won't go through the entire thing step by step, but I'll give you a couple highlights. So first, if you click through to the Mass Health content on mass.gov, the state website, there's a lot of information to wade through. And yet there doesn't seem to be anything here for somebody who's new to this. If I dig through it, I get to a page about renewing insurance, a page that tells me how to enroll in a health plan, but only if I've already been approved for it. A page that tells me how to apply for that approval, okay, getting warmer. And finally, there's a page that tells me about eligibility, which is what I really want to know. However, it tells me that I need to actually apply in order to know if I'm eligible. So it never really clearly tells me whether this is even the right program for me to apply to. And this whole time, there's no mention that this is only a subset of the available insurance options. There are others, and at minimum, everyone is eligible for insurance through the marketplace. That's pretty important. The second link from that Google search goes to a website called the Massachusetts Health Connector. This does mention a handful of programs here, but still doesn't clearly outline what's available to whom. And then that third website is also called the Health Connector, and this is confusing in its own way. I won't get into that. Suffice it to say that getting health insurance in Massachusetts is not really an easy experience if you're not already familiar with how the system works. Let's say you do manage to get registered for a Health Connector plan, but you get stuck somewhere in the process. So you call for help. But after you've waited on hold, the customer service rep can't help you. They can't find your account in the system, and they don't know what happened to it. So why is that? Well, the reason is that there are different phone numbers for the Health Connector and for Mass Health, but both sets of contact information are displayed on the same website. It's a reasonable conclusion to think that the name Mass Health describes my health insurance that I got, through the Massachusetts government, but that, then I would call that number, but that may not be correct. So the point of this is not just to go on a rant about the usability of government services, although I do think we should demand better from our state government. The point is that this is instructive from an IA perspective, IA meaning information architecture. One takeaway is that there was a failure to account for user needs. At the beginning of the scenario, I hadn't made a decision yet. I just wanted to know what was available to me. But much of the content I encountered required me to already know which program I was interested in. But beyond that, there was a conceptual breakdown. My mental model was that I was looking for health insurance. What I found was organized in terms of programs or perhaps government departments, Mass Health in one place and Health Connector in another place. Start with the program and get to the insurance later. But even that is ambiguous. Are Mass Health and Health Connector the only two programs? What about all these other ones? Is the Health Connector a kind of insurance, or is it just a container for all the others? Is it a container for everything except Mass Health? What about insurance from the marketplace? Is there a Health Connector inside the Health Connector? The structure is never really clear. And I want to stress that this isn't just an issue of labeling and writing a description for each program. That would certainly help. But this is a structural issue that's pervasive throughout the entire online experience. Another example, I have an application and an enrollment. Why are they two things? Are they steps in a process? Does the application contain the enrollment? Once I've finished enrolling, why do I still have an application? So again, this is not just labeling. This goes deep into the data models and the functionality of their systems. Whatever the right conceptual model is, it isn't clear, and it isn't applied consistently throughout the experience. As many of you know, Mass.gov is famously built on Drupal. It's built with an extremely high quality of design, usability engineering, technical infrastructure, and a toolkit of thoughtfully built content types and templates. It's an amazing accomplishment. A huge amount of thought goes toward making sure content is written in plain, step-by-step language that most Massachusetts residents will be able to follow. But you can have a great UI design, great software, great content, and the system still isn't usable without effective navigation and a strong conceptual structure. This is not easy. It's easy to get tied up in more visible aspects of UX design and development and lose sight of how it all fits together. When we do talk about IA, it gets reduced to navigation menus. Sometimes we end up making guesses, or we let organizational politics define IA. And we know that's a problem because users don't think about your organization the way you think about it internally. They don't know enough about you to understand how you're organized. It's important to recognize that we are not just building interfaces. We build environments in which people live and work and interact every day. We live in information. The architecture matters. So I'm going to talk about three main topics that you can use to help think through navigation and IA problems like this one. We'll start by looking at how humans navigate and how that knowledge can help us build better websites. And then we'll get into this idea of conceptual structure and how to do concept modeling before translating that into navigation design. A quick bit about me. Oh, and I will share the slides afterwards, along with a resource guide. I'll put that online a little later today. Quick bit about me. Again, my name is Dan Zollman. I'm an independent consultant specializing in information architecture and UX strategy. I've also spent a long time doing these things in-house at places like Vanguard, Tufts University, and the state of Massachusetts. And apart from IA, I'm very interested in topics like the theory of design, systems thinking, and responsible and ethical design. So I won't be talking about those topics right now, but I'll be around later today if you want to chat about them. All right. Just going to pause for a drink. So when we talk about navigation, often we're talking about parts of a website, things like menus and links. There are many different aspects of a website that support navigation and information seeking. Menus, search, but all of these other things that you see here. I want to shift that mindset for a moment. I'm going to borrow a bit from another IA theorist, Andrew Hinton. Andrew said, navigation is not a menu on a screen. Navigation is what people do. You're navigating when you're looking for information on a website, but also when you're scrolling on social media, reading about something, asking a friend to explain something to you, calling customer service. Andrew says, my health insurer's website just had a big update that made it a lot more navigable, and that's great. But what it does not do is help me navigate the broader system more effectively. It doesn't help me find my way, translate between divergent meanings, or interact with other entities very well. Luca Rosati and Andrea Resmini say, we say navigate, but we really mean understand. And going back to Andrew, he says, navigation is a handy label for humans perceiving and acting in an environment so as to understand what it is, how it works, and where to acquire the resources each human needs. People use all of the resources in their environment to help them understand. Andrew illustrates how navigation is associated with a person in a particular situation with particular needs, seeking the resources to meet those needs. And we can build better ecosystems by understanding what those situations are, what the needs are, what those resources should be. So to summarize, navigation is about understanding, using the resources around you to understand. But let's take that a step further. Just having the information there doesn't mean people will find it. We can't just add a search field and call it done. Human information-seeking behaviors have been a topic of study in relation to computer systems since the 1960s. As one example, Marcia Bates is one important scholar whose work has been highly influential in the world of information system design over the past 5 decades, starting with her early research on how people search in library catalogs. One of Bates' best-known ideas is the berry-picking model of information seeking. Earlier theories stated that a user starts with a certain goal in mind, and they simply keep searching until they find the information they want. In the berry-picking model, a user starts with an initial query, and they get an initial result. So that's in the bottom left there. They might take a little bit of information from that result, but that wasn't exactly the result they wanted. So they try again with a different query. Along the way, a new thought or idea comes to mind, and that sends them in a different direction. They continue on this semi-improvised pathway, gleaning different pieces of information along the way. The berry-picking model shows that people don't just start with a goal in mind and then satisfy it. They use a wide variety of techniques and strategies at different points in time with an evolving goal that's not known up front. And all of these techniques work together to help people navigate successfully. Navigation behaviors range from exploration without a concrete goal in mind to known item searches, where you're looking for a very specific thing. Donna Spencer describes how sometimes, adding to those two behaviors, Donna Spencer describes how sometimes you just don't know what you need to know. Think about somebody visiting your organization's website. What would their experience be if they don't know what they need to know? There are also situations where you need to find something you've seen before, refinding. Maybe you don't remember exactly what it is or how to get back to it. What clues would you be looking for to help you remember? Think about how a website can have a mix of functionality and UI patterns that help in situations where you're looking for a specific item, or you're just exploring, or you're trying to pick up where you left off yesterday. Dan Ramsden, information architect and creative director at the BBC, describes how behaviors range in the level of intentionality or motivation. That's going from top to bottom in this diagram. Browsing around a used bookstore just to see what piques your interest is a lot different than looking for a cookbook that has a specific recipe. People also vary in the amount of context and knowledge they have about the topic. That affects the strategies they use and the language they will use to express what they want. Dan creatively defines his own 4 modes of information seeking, which he divides into to 12 more specific behaviors. I'd encourage you to check out these resources on his website. Won't go through all of them now. I especially like the metaphor of foggy finding to describe how sometimes you don't always really understand what you're doing when you're navigating unfamiliar territory. Again, you're just sort of picking things out as clues to try to guide yourself. Each of these modes is supported by different features and design patterns in the user interface. Information-seeking behaviors are affected by UI affordances, so that the UI affects what strategies you can or can't use. The information you see along the way changes what you do by telling you what's available. It makes you aware of something you didn't know you were looking for. You discover things. And seeing a menu of options to choose from is easier than trying to remember the specific phrase to search for. That's the psychological principle of recognition over recall. So it's easier to recognize something when you see it in front of you than to try and think of the words off the top of your head. The idea of information scent, which comes from a model called information foraging theory, is really helpful in thinking about labels in a UI. The idea behind information scent is that if you're looking at a set of options, you look for the cues that look like they will get you closest to the thing you actually need. So, for example, this is the main Drupal website. It's okay that DrupalCon isn't one of the links in the main navigation menu, because the word events carries the information scent of a conference. Now that's specific to an audience because words carry different connotations for different people. This is something to think about in the way you categorize content and the way you label it. Information scent can help people find information, but it can also mislead someone and send them down the wrong path, like in my Mass Health example. Mass Health had the right information scent, even though I really needed something else. So we've talked a bit about how people seek information, use the resources they encounter to help them move from one step to the next. But I want to go back to Andrew's idea that we're both perceiving and acting in an environment, moving through an environment. Sometimes we need to be aware of that environment in order to move through it. If you're at the art museum, you go from one painting to the next, reading the signs to help you along. But sometimes you'll stop and say, which room am I in? Am I in medieval art? How do I get to modern art? Wayfinding refers to the ways in which people orient themselves and navigate from place to place. It also describes systems in the built environment, like signage, that enable people to wayfind. We may use maps from time to time to orient ourselves and to plan our route, but when we start moving, we're experiencing ourselves in relationship to the environment around us, making decisions about where to go from one moment to the next. Oh, I remember, the registration desk is that way. We may take a different route than the one we plotted on a map. That's wayfinding. Similarly, on a website, you don't normally look at a sitemap. You just look at the page you're on and look for cues that tell you where you are and what kinds of spaces are available to you. Sorry, something happened on my screen. So we look for answers to these questions in everything we see on a web page. Page titles, headings, menus, breadcrumbs, imagery, colors. So to recap, navigation is about understanding, and that includes using all of the resources available in our environment. We want to design for a range of information-seeking behaviors, including situations where people don't know what they're looking for and where they do know what they're looking for. And we can support wayfinding by making the structure of the website visible. So we talked about some of the human needs that need to be satisfied through the design and structure of a website. But how do we actually design an environment that works for people? As we've seen, menus, breadcrumbs, and other elements are all part of a website's navigation systems. They help to meet the needs that we just talked about. But there's an underlying conceptual structure of a website or a product or a system that goes deeper than menus. Think about the Mass Health and Health Connector example. As an analogy, a subway map tells you where you are, where you can go, and which subway stops are connected to which stops. But it doesn't tell you everything you need to know about navigating the city. If your goal is to take the T to see some historic architecture, you need to know something about the neighborhoods you're traveling through. And it also doesn't tell you that it's a 5-minute walk from downtown Crossing, downtown Crossing to State Street, but a 12-minute walk between two stops that appear closer together because this map has an intentionally distorted scale. The subway system the subway map is a navigation system with a specific purpose that helps you travel within a more complex territory. Jesse James Garrett illustrated how there's a similar relationship on a website. Oops. So all of the menus and navigation elements in the UI are part of the surface and skeleton, but there's still a need to design the underlying conceptual structure. Let's look at the Design for Drupal website as an example. Looking through the navigation menu at the top, the home page, some of the other pages, we can uncover some of the core concepts that are important to this conference. Things like the conference schedule, sessions, speakers, larger ideas like design and the wider Drupal community. We can start adding relationships between these concepts. Sessions are presented by speakers, sessions are shown on the schedule is grouped into tracks. We could keep going and add more concepts and more detail, but already we have a rough concept model representing Design for Drupal as a system. The most important takeaway for this portion of the presentation is the idea that you should be doing concept modeling like this when you build a website. Having a concept model helps you in a few different ways. First, it helps to make sure that we understand the underlying conceptual structure of whatever we're building. And when we do modeling as a group, it helps to build alignment across the team. It helps to identify connections that might not be obvious. For example, thinking about the conference's relationship to the wider Drupal community. That's not a page on the website, but it does affect how we write the website and link it to other resources. It helps to resolve ambiguity. For example, the conference as a whole has a location. Sessions also have locations within the overall location. So there's actually a little bit more going on here that we might want to tease out. And then this becomes a foundation for designing and building the website. It's a foundation to think through how the site will be organized, the content we'll create, how we'll link content together. And for those of you building content models and content types and fields in Drupal, this is a foundation for that as well. So I'm going to come back to this diagram in a few minutes to talk about how this translates to navigation menus. But first, how do we arrive at a good conceptual structure? How does this fit into our process? So I'll talk about that and then come back to the the technicalities. So when you're working on a big project, I'm going to assume that the process looks something like this, or some combination of these things. And in the early stages, you're gathering all of the information you're going to use to plan out the website. Lou Rosenfeld, Peter Morville, and Jorge Arango describe information architecture as an intersection of content, context, and users. So in your projects, you're probably doing research and gathering information in all three of these areas. For content, you're auditing the existing content types, metadata. You're figuring out how content is categorized or could be categorized, and you're identifying what content is missing. The context includes business considerations. What's the organization's mission, goals, success criteria? You want to understand their messaging. What are they trying to communicate to their audiences? Context also includes the broader environment. During the pandemic, the context changed for many organizations. And users includes everything you typically look at in UX research. Who are the audiences? What are the scenarios or situations in which they're coming to the website and interacting with the organization? What are their goals? What user needs are not being met? From a user perspective, common models include things like personas, scenarios, activity analysis, task analysis, and understanding a user's mental model. This is the way their understanding of a domain is organized. Their mental models are especially important for information architecture. And Indy Young's book on that is a great resource for understanding and mapping out mental models. So during the research phase, you're looking at all elements in all three of these areas. But then you get to a point where you need to take all the information you've gathered and translate that to solutions. You might reach a moment of confusion or loss of clarity where you feel overwhelmed, struggling to understand the amount of information that's coming to you. You need to establish your own perspective on how you're going to solve the design problem. In design and design thinking, we have the concepts of ideation, synthesis, reframing in the middle of the process, where you come to a new understanding of the problem you're solving, which leads you to new ways of thinking about the solution. This involves multiple iterations of divergence, transformation, and convergence. Divergence is breaking down the problem into pieces. Transformation is putting the pieces back together in a new way. And convergence is testing to discover the consequences of that new arrangement. This builds on all of the information we've gathered about content, context, and users. So this is where modeling comes in. Information architects like Abby Covert and Joe Elmendorf talk about how diagramming and modeling are powerful tools to get through these moments. Abby says that diagrams are particularly helpful in grounding us when we feel anxious because we can use diagrams to fly through time and space and consume a fuller picture. We can zoom out on problems and see different solutions. We can find secure footing in an unsure environment. I've had times when a client is telling me about everything their organization does, and I'm thinking, wow, they're all over the place. That's way too much. My next step is probably to draw a picture and make sense of it. Modeling is useful for understanding, getting through ambiguity, synthesizing research, mapping how systems work, communicating that understanding to our teammates. Modeling is also useful for meaning making, defining the concepts and relationships that we discover, exploring new arrangements, and creating a conceptual foundation before we get into the nitty-gritty of UX design, content, and data modeling. This is a basic process for concept modeling. You're basically building a list of concepts and connecting them together. Usually the concepts are objects, are nouns, and the connection lines are verbs. You don't even have to label the connections, but that can be a helpful second step. So going back to this example, having a concept model like this helps us ask questions. At the conceptual level, we have questions like, what is a session? What's a BOF? I forgot to add that here. What are the characteristics of a session? What do we mean by location? At the content level, we can ask questions about how the content will be organized. Speakers and sessions will probably end up as node types in Drupal. Other things like the Drupal community, that's not going to be a node type, and again, maybe not even a page, but it still affects what we write about, what we link to. And finally, having a concept model helps us ask questions about navigation and sitemap structure. For example, so this is a quick sitemap of the design for Drupal site that I put together. So why are there two different pages for the schedule? Why do trainings have a special page, but other sessions don't? Should the location and travel information have its own page? Will a website visitor understand how we've organized this? I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong answer here. There are plenty of reasons to be creative with the navigation. Just that these are questions to ask. Okay, so let's step back and recap. Effective information architecture is built on a cohesive underlying conceptual structure. We can use the categories of content, context, users to explore the conceptual structure of the design situation. And then we can use concept modeling to synthesize, resolve ambiguity, and build alignment upstream before we get into content modeling and UI design. All right, so that's part two. We talked about navigation and understanding and information-seeking behaviors. Then we talked about the conceptual structure of a website. Now let's see how this comes together and translates to navigation design. So, we've encountered a few different types of models. Concept models, content models, which is specifically about the types of content and how the types of content are related, sitemaps, and navigation systems. And these are all different things. Think of the subway map or the design for Drupal websites. These are all part of a website's information architecture, but they focus on different things. A navigation menu reveals specific aspects of a site structure without telling you everything at once. On a more complex website, we might have multiple concept models that address different issues, different sitemaps for different areas, and multiple menus for different purposes, and that's fine. I'm going to demonstrate with one more example of a project, and this might look familiar. So this is a before picture from a website redesign for a large nonprofit in Phoenix, Arizona. This nonprofit is supported by a large, highly engaged community of volunteers and donors. And they offer services related to housing, food, healthcare, recovery, and other forms of support for people in need throughout the Phoenix region. So briefly, let's go through each of the three categories in the Venn diagram. I won't cover the full scope of the website. That would be too big. Just a couple details from each category. So looking through an example of the existing content, that diagram is a bit small. So we can see that this organization offers a variety of programs across a number of physical locations. So this page is titled Dining Rooms. And at the top, in the main navigation, you can see that the label Programs is highlighted, telling us that we're in the Programs section of the website, and we're on the Dining Rooms page. So, so we've got programs, physical locations, and the website is also promoting volunteer opportunities. But most of that information currently is flattened together into a single page type, the program page. Thinking about it from a business perspective, we learned a lot about the organization's mission and goals. Of course, they want to use the website to increase donations and volunteering. But it was also important to understand how volunteering and donating is not just a transactional relationship, but it's part of a culture of community building and meaningful service. In addition, the organization has built sustainable models for addressing issues like homelessness and housing, which is a really big deal if you work in this space. And it's important to educate audiences about that. From a user perspective, the website serves a highly diverse audience. We used activities like journey mapping as one tool to explore the different kinds of information that each of these groups might need as they move along their sort of the stages in their relationship with the organization. One interesting takeaway is that different audiences have different information needs, even when they're reading about the same topic. The dining rooms are an important program because they're hubs where many different kinds of services are delivered. Donors might want information about dining rooms as a program overall. What is what is the program? What is its impact? What will my donation do? But a family traveling to a dining room needs information about the services they can access. So programs and services are actually different kinds of information, whether we put them on the same page or not. So meanwhile, throughout this process, this is some of the really rough sketching I was doing to try and capture the concepts that I thought would be important to the website. At this point, I'm not worried about specific content yet. I'm just trying to map the system of how the organization works and how a community member relates to that. Later on, this is a rough draft for a somewhat more refined diagram, narrowed down to concepts that would specifically appear as content on the website. So this is a precursor to an actual content model. Each of these boxes represents a type of content. The site is organized around programs in the middle here, and each program is associated with services, locations, and volunteer opportunities. There's a many-to-many relationship between each one. We also added new content, this idea of an issue at the top, like homelessness or food insecurity, and that contains educational content, which is relevant to the programs. A key thing to realize is that each audience needs different information as they traverse the structure. So locations appear in different ways throughout the website. Volunteer opportunities appear in different ways. So in addition to really clarifying these different types of content and separating them and defining them, a benefit of this is that it was scalable. So we anticipated that the organization might want to add more services in the future. They would want to build more functionality on top of volunteer opportunities like searching and filtering and registration. And the fact that we had really identified all of the attributes and fields of volunteer opportunities in advance made it really easy to add those things on later. So this doesn't cover all of the website's content. The sitemap shows how all of the content fits together. And I don't expect you to be able to read this. We arrived at some very distinct clusters of content. Someone who's making a donation needs very specific information about the organization's programs, impact, financials, and tax implications of donating. Someone thinking about volunteering needs to know why they should volunteer, what it's like to volunteer, and what they should expect in the process. Same for a company who's thinking about forming a partnership, and so on. So each of those things became a section of the website linked from the main navigation. But these yellow elements show how those core pieces of content show up in different ways across the different sections of the website. The main navigation menu shows that the website was ultimately organized within 4 main sections. Get help is for people seeking services, give for donations, our work for programs and issues. The secondary navigation, these smaller links, point towards more focused types of content that someone might need in order to engage with the organization or travel to one of its locations. So this leads me to the 4 purposes, not the 4, but 4 purposes of a site's main navigation menu. And might run a little minute or two over 9:45. But I'll address each of these briefly, and I will share the slides, so don't worry too much about remembering all the details. So number 1, perhaps the most obvious, is that a navigation menu provides a path to anything the user might be looking for, even if they don't know how to get there. Some things to think about here are how we build upon users' mental models. How is this domain organized in the mind of the user? Different users might have different mental models for the same content. Second, categories emerge through content classification, so understanding the categories and attributes of all the content on the website can help you with that. And third, we're choosing labels that provide information sent. So when I read that label, that gives me the cue that the information I'm looking for lives within that section of the website. Here are some examples of ways of classifying content, by user needs, by task or activity, by the stage in a customer lifecycle, what we offer, download the software, documentation and training, by subject or topic, and so forth. And these can also be mixed too in the same navigation system. A second purpose is to provide quick, direct access to specific items or tasks. So this emphasizes known item seeking, where I have a specific thing in mind, whether or not I'm using the right word for it. Things to think about here are the user scenarios that you've identified for the website, and also some of the top tasks, the most frequent tasks people have when they enter the website. Jerry McGovern's top task method is great for identifying these tasks. And then, known item seeking may call for different labels than in situations where somebody, might not know what they're looking for. So third purpose is a little bit different. Inform users what's available on the site. This is a bit more educational. Think about exploratory information seeking and don't know what you need to know situations. The principle of recognition over recall. We also want to think about business goals. What does the business want to promote? What are the business's products, lines of business? If something is missing from the navigation, you're going to hear about it eventually from that department. And then what is shown versus hidden initially. So in the early 2010s, along with that initial wave of responsive and mobile first design, there was I heard this, a big narrative going around that people don't use navigation. They just browse and click on links. They just search. And that led to a lot of attention being brought to writing really good linked content, which is great. But it was also used to justify getting rid of main navigation or hiding it in a hamburger menu. And again, there are reasons for that too. But if you're hiding the menu, you're not informing new visitors what's available on the site, if they don't look at them. That point also applies to this fourth one, which is to explain the brand. So the labels in the navigation menu helps to showcase the brand, the tone, voice, personality, keywords. Again, we're thinking about the business's goals here. Really quickly, I want to show you a couple fun examples of that. In 2014, so Stuart Maxwell tells the story of how REI in 2014 did an A/B test where they removed the word climb from this menu because it wasn't performing as well as other links. But customers were upset. Climbing is really important to the culture of REI, and this sent the message that climbing wasn't as important to REI anymore. So they changed it back pretty quickly. And finally, we need to make sure that clarity, understandability, and information sent are not lost when using brand words. So mass.gov is a great example of navigation that conveys a brand. It's very welcoming, and it performed well in tree testing for situations when the user knows what they're looking for. But where it fails is that it doesn't really educate you about the kinds of things that you can do on the website. And Venture Cafe Cambridge is another example where the words connect, learn, and share, they make me feel really good. But if I want to know what events are coming up, I have no idea which one to click on because they all sound relevant. And as you can see, they've compensated for that by adding not one, but three different elements of the UI right next to each other, all to make sure that people can find the upcoming events. Okay, this is the last piece here. Just really briefly, some quick mental checks or ways of testing main navigation taxonomy. Obviously, this could be a whole another topic to go into. Use user scenarios and user tasks as a checklist. So go through each of the ones that you've identified and think about how that plays out in the navigation. Consider each of the information-seeking behaviors for each one. So I'm in this situation, I do know what I'm looking for. I'm in this situation, but I don't know what I'm looking for. In usability testing, prompt people to show you, where would you expect to find blank? And ask them, what would you expect to find under this label? What's your interpretation of that label? So that you can understand if the meaning of the label is received as you intended. So, okay, so those are the four purposes that I've talked about. There are certainly others, things like orienting users by showing the currently selected item or section in the navigation. Informing search engines is also a big one. So there are others, and on any given website, some of these things may be more important than others. And that's it. Thank you so much. I will have the slides and notes, speaker notes, and resource guide available at this link by the end today, hopefully. I'll be around for the rest of the day if you want to chat or if you have questions. I'm available for consulting if your organization needs help with information architecture. So feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you so much.